If you are taking every set to failure because you think that's the fastest way to build muscle, you might be making a huge mistake. For years, we've been told that if you are not training until the weight literally stops moving, you are leaving gains on the table. But what if the opposite is true? What if constantly training to failure is creating more fatigue than muscle growth? Because according to modern research, the people who build the most muscle over the long term aren't the ones pushing every set to the absolute limit. They are the ones who know how to manage effort, recover properly, and keep progressing week after week. So in this video, we'll answer 3 questions. Do you actually need to train to failure to build muscle? What does the scientific evidence really say? And if failure isn't the answer, what should you do instead? Let us start with why this idea became so popular in the first place. The belief is easy to understand. If muscle growth requires hard training, then training to failure must be the hardest possible option. So naturally, many people assume it must also be the best. But that's where the misunderstanding begins. Training hard and training to failure are not the same thing. Imagine 2 people doing bicep curls. The first person finishes the set knowing they could have done 1 or 2 more reps. The second person keeps going until the weight won't move. Most people assume the second person is creating a much bigger muscle building stimulus, but that's not necessarily true. By the final reps of a hard set, both lifters are already recruiting nearly all available muscle fibers. The difference in muscle stimulus may be quite small. The difference in fatigue can be enormous. And that's why training to failure feels effective. Not because it always works better, but because it feels harder. Unfortunately, what feels harder isn't always what produces the best results. So what happens when we look at the actual research? To understand this, we need to introduce a simple concept called RER, or reps in reserve. RER refers to how many reps you could still perform before reaching failure. If you finish a set and could have done 2 more reps, that's RER 2. Now here's the important part. Research shows that training close to failure is generally enough to maximize muscle growth. You don't need to reach complete failure. Several studies comparing failure training with non-failure training have found very similar results. This study found that as long as effort levels are high, muscle growth can occur without reaching failure. Moreover, a large meta-analysis reached a similar conclusion. After analyzing multiple studies, researchers found no meaningful advantage for training to failure when it comes to muscle growth or strength development. In simple terms, if you are stopping 1, 2, or even 3 reps before failure, where it will be called RER from 1 to 3, you are already getting most of the muscle building benefit, but you are avoiding a large amount of unnecessary fatigue, and that changes the entire conversation. Because muscle growth is just not about how hard you can train today, it's about how well you can recover and continue training tomorrow. Now, does that mean training to failure is useless? Not at all. Failure training can absolutely be useful when applied strategically. One of its biggest advantages is that it guarantees a high level of effort. For beginners who struggle to judge intensity, reaching failure occasionally can help them understand what a truly hard sell feels like. According to research published in the Journal of Sports Sciences, there are situations where training to failure can be beneficial. One of the best examples is the final set of an exercise. By saving failure for the last set, you can get the benefit of maximum effort without accumulating excessive fatigue across the entire workout. The research also suggests that failure training may be more appropriate when training volume is lower and rest periods are longer. Also, it tends to work best for people with some training experience, who already understand proper technique. Exercise selection matters too. Failure training is generally safer on isolation exercise such as bicep curls, triceps push-downs or lateral raises, or on machines that provide additional stability. On heavy compound lifts like squats, deadlifts or bench press, constantly pushing to failure often creates more risk than reward. The key takeaway is simple. Training to failure is a tool. It's not a rule, and problems start when people turn that tool into the foundation of every workout. This is where many lifters get stuck. They assume that if failure works sometimes, then it must work even better all the time. But that's not how the body works. Muscles don't grow because you feel exhausted. They grow because they recover and adapt. And recovery has limits. When every set reaches failure, fatigue begins to accumulate rapidly. Your muscles become more fatigued, your nervous system becomes more fatigued, and eventually your performance starts to suffer. You notice weights feeling heavier than usual, Progress slows down, strength stalls, and perhaps most importantly, technique starts to deteriorate. When you are pushing for one last impossible rep, your body often compensates. You swing the weight, you change your movement pattern, you recruit muscles that weren't supposed to be involved. Instead of creating a better stimulus, you are often creating more risk. Think about it like studying for an exam. Studying hard is productive. Studying until you are mentally exhausted every single day eventually becomes counterproductive. Training follows the same principle. There is a point where extra effort creates more fatigue than benefit, and many lifters cross that line without realizing it. So if failure training isn't the best default strategy, what is? For most people, the sweet spot is surprisingly simple. Train hard, but stop slightly before failure, specifically around 1 to 3 reps in reserve. Research on rear-based training has shown that using repetitions in reserve is an effective way to regulate training intensity while still producing excellent results. Why does this work so well? Because it gives you the best of both worlds. You are still training hard enough to recruit nearly all the muscle fibers responsible for growth, but you are avoiding the massive fatigue that comes with reaching absolute failure. That means better recovery, better technique, better workout performance, and better long-term progression, and ultimately, more muscle growth over time. A great example comes from a study comparing 2 groups of trained lifters over 8 weeks. One group trained to complete failure, the other stopped each set with roughly 1 or 2 reps left in the tank. The results showed similar muscle growth between both groups. However, the group that stopped short of failure experienced less fatigue and recovered more effectively. That's an important finding, because if 2 approaches produce similar muscle gains, but one leaves you fresher and more recovered, that approach is usually the better long-term option. Imagine 2 lifters training chest. One reaches failure on every set. The other stops 1 or 2 reps short. Both stimulate muscle growth, but the second lifter arrived at the next workout feeling stronger, more recovered, and ready to progress again. And that's how real hypertrophy happens, not from one heroic workout, but from hundreds of high-quality workouts performed consistently all the time. So do you need to train to failure to build muscle? No. The scientific evidence is pretty clear. Training close to failure is usually enough to maximize muscle growth. That doesn't mean failure training has no place. Used strategically, especially on the final set of an exercise or doing isolation movements, it can be a useful tool. But making every set a battle to complete exhaustion is often creating more fatigue than benefit. So instead of chasing failure, focus on quality effort. Train hard. Stay within 1 to 3 reps of failure most of the time. Recover properly, and keep progressing week after week. Because muscle growth is not about destroying yourself in a single workout. It's about giving your muscles a reason to grow, recover, and repeating that process consistently. Because remember, small changes constantly applied, that's how real results happen. If you are new here, Applied Human Lab is where science meets real results, because most people don't lack effort, they lack the right information. So if you want to stop guessing and start understanding, make sure you subscribe and stick around for the next videos. See you soon.